In this video, we explore some extremely rare and bizarre cases that changed the perception of art. Throughout history, no era has been as controversial and debated as contemporary art. From feces and bananas taped to walls to an unmade bed after sex, anything can enter a gallery and be labeled as art, something we now call contemporary art. In this video, we're going to examine the most shocking and controversial works of this era. Contemporary art is very different from the art of other periods. Many people believe these works aren't even art. How can a banana and some tape be art? How can a toilet be art? The short answer is this: understanding art before the contemporary era was simple. It's almost impossible to look at a sculpture by Michelangelo and not be amazed by its grandeur, not recognize it as art. It's nearly impossible to see a Caravaggio painting and not be astonished by its details and precision. But contemporary art marks the end of art that brings joy just by looking at it. To understand it, we have to make an effort. Contemporary art is based on ideas, not aesthetics. Today, we're not going to discuss where contemporary art came from. Today, we're diving into the strangest works of contemporary art. We'll look at them and explore their concepts. You're not going to see anything by Picasso, Van Gogh, or Frida Kahlo, but you will see works that will definitely surprise you. So sit back and enjoy. The list is not in any specific order. When did contemporary art reach its peak? It began in the 1960s. In this period, we have Piero Manzoni. Manzoni was born in 1932 in Soncino, Italy, and died in 1963 in Milan. 2 years before his death, he created a work called Artist Shit Merda di Artista, which literally translates to artist's feces. Manzoni filled 90 tin cans with 30 grams of his own feces and sold them at the price of gold. His work was a form of satire. A satire on whom? On the kind of artist who, quite literally, shits gold, produces gold from themselves. Manzoni's work mocked the world of art and the commodification of it. What does that mean? It means Manzoni, by canning his own feces and presenting it as an artwork, mocked the economic valuation happening in the art world. He was mocking the commercialization of art. He showed that in the modern art world, what is labeled as art is more dependent on the economic system and the market in which it's presented and priced, rather than its quality or content. In fact, those cans were a critique of the state of contemporary art, where anything can be sold as art as long as it is properly packaged and advertised. Manzoni showed that if something is labeled as art and placed within the art market, people are willing to pay a lot of money for it, even if it's just a can of feces. You see, when we look at it this way, we might actually come to like this artist because he's thinking, just like many of us, that this form and structure of art is ridiculous, and he created this work to challenge it. But the subtle irony here is that the very tool he used to challenge the system has now become the very thing he was fighting against. And today, when we want to name an example of contemporary art, we mention Manzoni's artist shit. Let me tell you one more thing about these cans. Some people say they weren't actually filled with feces, but with plaster. But since the cans are made of steel, you can't scan them with X-rays to be sure. On the other hand, opening one doesn't make sense either, because it would destroy the value of the piece. You know how much one of these cans goes for at auction? $275,000. Honestly, I wouldn't open it either. But it's a fascinating paradox. Manzoni came along saying, "What's with these crazy prices? Here, take my feces." And in a strange twist, it ends up getting priced exactly like that. In the end, it really doesn't matter whether it's actually feces or not. That's not the point. The point is that in art, and especially in contemporary art, it's the statement and the ideas that matter. So, for some people, it's a brilliant piece of art, and for others, it's literally crap. You can share your opinion too. You don't need to be an expert to give your thoughts. Just say what you think. Even back then, the exhibitions and the viewing of these cans were open to the public. We've talked a lot about Manzoni's cans, but the goal here is to explore the nature of contemporary art through these works. We said that the 1960s were the peak of contemporary art. During that time, a movement called Fluxus emerged. The artists of Fluxus wanted to use art as a tool of protest against the prevailing artistic values, kind of like what Marcel Duchamp did with his toilet or what Manzoni did with his feces cans. But Fluxus artists took that idea a bit further. I mention this so you can better understand the next artwork we'll discuss. Fluxus artists used humor. They embraced randomness. They were continuing the legacy of earlier artists, but their approach was even less structured and interdisciplinary too. What does that mean? It means they held festivals that took art out of museums and galleries. It was essentially an anti-art movement. They believed art should be cheap, accessible, and even meaningless. That's how opposed they were to the mechanisms of the art world. They were protesting how overly commercialized art had become, how massive sums of money were being exchanged. They protested the fact that a Van Gogh could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. They wanted to prove that art could be anything, not just what gallery owners said it was. Art could be a joke. It could be a fleeting moment. In fact, performance art emerged from the artistic events of Fluxus artists. They focused on an act, a performance which by the late 1960s, and especially in the 1970s, led to the formation of a new artistic movement and discipline, performance art. Let's move on to the next piece, which belongs to Vito Acconci. He was born in 1940 in New York and passed away in 2017. He was a pioneer in the field of performance, but his performances were anything but conventional, often even notorious. Probably his most controversial piece was performed in 1972 at the Sonnabend Gallery in New York. What was it? There was an empty space in the gallery with a wooden ramp built in it. Acconci hid underneath this ramp, out of view from visitors, and masturbated while narrating his sexual fantasies out loud, fantasies inspired by the movements of the visitors walking above him. His voice was amplified and played through loudspeakers, so it could be clearly heard. Acconci performed this piece for 3 weeks, 8 hours a day. With this work, Acconci transformed the relationship between artist and audience. How? Normally, gallery visitors have a passive role. They come, look at the work, and leave. But in this case, the visitors were unknowingly part of the performance. Without them, there would be no performance. And the question is, how would they feel if they knew someone was sexually fantasizing about them? This piece remains one of the most controversial performances in art history because it challenged the ideas of audience consent, moral boundaries, and the concept of public versus private space. In my opinion, the most important aspect of this work is that it also challenged the concept of being watched. The idea of being watched, or the gaze, is a key concept in philosophy, psychology, and especially contemporary art. In Seedbed, which was the name of this piece, Acconci flipped this idea, raising questions like, who is watching whom? And what effect does that have? Let's do a quick recap. The audience is walking, but they're not seen, or at least they think they're not being seen. Normally in art, the viewer is the observer, and the artwork is the object being looked at. But here, it's the opposite. Visitors enter the gallery and walk on a sloped wooden surface. They think no one is watching them. But in reality, Acconci is watching them, and based on their presence, he's having sexual fantasies. That means they've unknowingly become the object of someone's gaze. This is a kind of role reversal. In feminist theory, for example, by Laura Mulvey, there's a concept called the male gaze, which says that in culture and media, it's usually men who look and women who are looked at. This gaze often comes with a kind of power and control. She argues that in classic Hollywood cinema, for instance, the camera often focuses on women's bodies, not their thoughts or personalities. Women are frequently cast as lovers, beauties, or damsels in distress. Even camera angles and cinematography are set up in ways that make the female body appear more attractive, not the person, but the body. The main idea is that in cinema, art, and advertising, men are usually positioned as the viewers and women as the objects being viewed. Mulvey says this male gaze isn't just an artistic choice. It's a reflection of power and control in society. So what's the connection with Akansi's piece? Akansi intensifies and distorts this concept, drawing attention to this type of gaze. Now, the viewer, regardless of whether they're male or female, unknowingly becomes the subject of someone's sexual fantasy. And what happens if that viewer later finds out someone was fantasizing about them? How would that make them feel? What does it feel like to know you're being watched? This connects to modern debates about surveillance, privacy, and digital gaze. Like when security cameras are watching us, even if no one's actively looking, we're still being observed. This work pushed the boundaries of performance art. It showed that performance isn't just physical, it can be mental and psychological. Art isn't just something external, it can be a process that happens within me, within the artist's mind. The next piece is a painting, if we can even call it a painting. Robert Rauschenberg was born in 1925 in Texas and died in 2018 in Florida. Contemporary art is generally considered to be art created after World War II, so all the artists we're talking about were born in the 20th century. Rauschenberg is somewhat controversially best known for his paintings and graphic works that incorporate elements of American pop culture and everyday life. In the early 1950s, Rauschenberg created a series of artworks that continued Marcel Duchamp's approach, challenging the boundaries of conceptual art. He was one of the first artists to bring everyday objects into fine art. He had a major influence on pop art artists like Andy Warhol. Marcel Duchamp was the one who created the urinal sculpture, and in a way, the beginning of contemporary art is often associated with him and that work. So, what was Rauschenberg's idea? He wanted to explore whether an artwork could be created purely through erasure rather than addition, whether art could be about removing instead of drawing. And what was the result? The result was a blank sheet of paper with some smudges and marks. After erasing several of his own drawings, Rauschenberg approached the famous American painter Willem de Kooning and asked for a drawing to erase as part of this project. Eventually, with the help of Jasper Johns, another American artist, and according to some accounts, Rauschenberg's partner, they obtained a dirty, ink-stained piece of paper, framed and labeled it as an artwork, which went on to become one of Rauschenberg's most iconic and controversial pieces. The point is, this act of destruction was, in itself, a brilliant creative gesture, an idea that grabs the mind and provokes thought. When we think of making art, we usually imagine adding something like applying paint to a canvas or casting a sculpture. But Rauschenberg did the opposite. He created by removing, and that's exactly what made the idea valuable. It completely defied the conventions of traditional art, and that's what made it significant. In fact, this work was one of the early pieces to elevate the concept over the physical execution. It also challenged the notion of artistic value. If a Willem de Kooning painting is valuable and artistic, is that same painting still valuable after it's been erased? Is art only what we see, or does it lie in the idea and the process behind it? Another important point is that Rauschenberg did this at a time when abstract expressionism, the style de Kooning worked in, was on its last legs. With this act, Rauschenberg was announcing his departure from that movement. Whether you hate it or love it, this radical gesture, thanks to its wit and brilliance, became a distinct and lasting work. And for its avant-garde approach to art in the mid-20th century, Even before the height of conceptual art, it was widely praised. You can watch and follow the second part and continuation of this controversial and fascinating topic in the next video on our YouTube channel.